So everybody that's familiar to me, this is Nat at mending.me. And I specifically reached out and asked her to have a conversation with us tonight because she has such a strong voice in a really specific area of coercion, sexual coercion, marital coercion. And to be honest, I didn't even know it was a thing until very late in my counseling career. And then I started listening to her, and I never heard anybody talk about it like I've never heard anybody talk about it, Nat, like you do. And all of a sudden, I'm like, holy shit, that was me too. Like, I mean, to be honest, I think it's probably a huge number of marriages, especially in people over the age of 40.
Probably.
And
yeah.
anybody
I hear from a lot of young people, though.
Well, I was just going to say, and anybody who is married to a misogynist or a traditional background. So tell me,
it does seem to be more prevalent.
Why did you start talking about it?
I didn't mean to. It was about a year ago. It was November. I asked my husband to leave because he had been caught in a compromising position. And I knew we had problems all along, but this was sort of the straw, right? And so I asked him to just give me some space. And it was about a week after that, I sat down with TikTok in my face and just I made an anonymous account, and I was just going to talk to myself mainly. And I started to kind of talk about the dynamic in our house and why I'd asked him to leave. And it was over the course of the next probably month or two. I also happened to be getting into therapy, and I was Googling different things that were going on with me. And I was trying to figure myself out because I thought the problem was me. And I was trying to fix myself so that I could have more sex for my husband. I really wanted to make him happy, and he was not happy. And so as I'm talking about all of these things, people in the comments were peppering me every so often with the word coercion. And so I Googled it, and I started to learn more about it. And all of the context of sexual coercion was dating. It talked a lot about college kids, college women being coerced in bars and on dates. Nobody was talking about it in terms of marriage. And so I thought maybe that doesn't apply to marriage. But of course, my analytical brain said, no, this doesn't make sense at all. How can it not apply to marriage? And so then I started to talk about what had been going on with me and how I was learning in therapy how my body had been reacting to my husband and all of the trauma responses that I was having with regard to my husband. And I was able to, every single time I talked about one of these things, I was able to point to coercion as the reason for all of it. And that started the hashtag marital coercion, which technically the legal definition of marital coercion has nothing to do with sex. But I just started using that because that was the simplest way for me to define it.
I want to just point out, if this is triggering, that's certainly not our intention. This is a serious, hard conversation about relationships and sexual tension in relationships, in particularly coercion. So Nat,
and I'm sorry if I'm triggering someone. I have been talking about this so in depth for a year that I forget how many people are not used to hearing these things that I'm saying. And I apologize if it's too much.
So it's so interesting. And so probably more than half of my practice is couples counseling. And sex comes up in couples counseling constantly, right?
Yes.
Because when couples are disengaged emotionally, they tend to disengage physically. And so I find it fascinating that so many people have this core belief that marriage is a mechanism by which sexual needs are just automatically met.
Yeah. And well, I think there's a bigger picture to that. And I sort of frown on the term sexual needs in general, because I think our need is emotional, man or woman. We have a desperate need to be connected to other human beings. Sex is just one of the ways that we do that. And it's usually seems to be a result of an existing connection already.
Yes.
And so what I see happening in the comments from all the men who come after me all the time, what they're telling me is that they are incapable of any sort of connection with a woman unless they're having sex with her. And that's where it gets toxic.
Well, absolutely. And so I guess to be more clear, men don't understand, many men do not understand that they have emotional needs. And so they frame that in, and we teach them. Certainly the culture has been teaching men that the way to connect is through sex. And I think that if they're not asking questions and they're not trying to think more deeply about themselves, they're not even able to hear that.
Yeah.
As you know, it's, I can say that, and even coming from, you know, they pay me a good amount of money to tell them, and they're like, well, that's not true for me.
Yeah.
Because if you're not open to hearing it,
Yeah.
then, you know, it's not a reality to you until you get into a space where you don't feel threatened. And I think that if for everybody who's in here and listening, if you're in a place where your partner doesn't feel that they have emotional needs, now I think a lot of men would say, well, she listens to me, which is an emotional need. But I don't think that they connect that to the sex piece, right? Like, I think if I can have sex with you, then you'll listen to me.
Yes.
Right.
Or if you're not listening to me, having sex with you will make up for the way I'm feeling from you not listening to me. Yes. If I don't feel valued by you, all we need to do is have sex and that'll make me feel better.
Yes.
Yeah. But I'm now depending on you, my wife, to have access to your body to make me feel better.
Yes. Yes. Some of us, so, okay, affinity. Some of us spend years consumed with meeting our wife's needs at the expense of ourselves. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's true for some people, of course. You know, and I want to make it clear, if you're in the room, that this conversation isn't going to fit all of you. So,
and it's going to be uncomfortable for men.
And it's going to
right out of the gate. You're not going to like it.
Fair enough. I would ask, though, that you keep an open mind. So I'm a therapist. I do a lot of marriage counseling. And the reason that I asked Nat to join me is because this conversation, this problem, is a part of almost every single couple session that I eventually talk about, right? Because when that emotional connection gets broken, then the physical connection will probably break too at some point. And all of it needs to be mended. You really can't put the relationship back together unless you're fixing all of it.
Yes.
But the first thing is the emotional. You can't fix the sex without fixing the emotion, not authentically.
Yeah. No, and the other thing too is that I hear this in the comments too, and it makes perfect sense that they say that sex is not what's going to fix the relationship, but it's a symptom of how the relationship is going. So if you're not having a great sex life, it doesn't mean you have a problem. You don't have a sex problem. You have a relationship problem. And that's Amen. Where we're going wrong. We're trying to fix the sex problem, but it's not a sex problem.
Yes. Amen. Amen. I can't even touch my husband because of the emotional damage. Yeah. It's such an, I want everybody to hear what she said. If your relationship is struggling sexually, you don't have a sex problem. You have a relational problem. That can be fixed. You know, one of the other things that I talk about all the time is people will say my comments, marriage counseling doesn't work. And I mean, you cannot rebuild a house where the roof has been allowed to sit open to the elements for years. You don't rebuild the house, you have to tear it down. If you have a hole in your roof, you fix the hole in your roof before the damage becomes pervasive throughout the entire building. If
Yes.
your wife is turning you down, or your partner, because it's, it honestly does
It does go both ways.
If your partner is turning you down, stop and say, hey, are we disconnected? Because I didn't notice and I'm so sorry. Just say that. People are talking about expectations, and oh my God, I remember this. And I'm thinking my daughters are, I'm gonna have to be cautious. One of my daughters is sitting in the room with me, and I don't know if the other ones are checking in. And they're they're all in adults, and so that's fine, and they probably need to know this, but there's a line. Having said that, I remember feeling afraid if I wasn't in the mood that my partner was going to get mad. And I mean, give us just a clap if you are a person who has been there in your relationship, afraid that your partner was going to be mad if you didn't want to put out. Because I think that is
a very good question. And I think I want to do a poll now. I actually would love to see the ratio of men to women on that too.
Yeah, look at this. I think that what's interesting about this is that most of us would probably, if they pushed hard enough, just like a 4-year-old who says, but I want the candy, but I want the candy, but I want the candy. And honest to God, I can tell you how many times I said, I thought I married an adult. And I feel like you're acting as if you're one of the kids. Now, the truth is that response did not help the cause, right? That doesn't help the cause. And I think that's the conversation. Like, we need to know how to have that conversation. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, and it didn't present that way for me because I never had the guts to say anything to him like that. For me, I had Christianity coming down on me as well. So I had a lot of indoctrination telling me that it was my job. I was going to cause him to sin. And all of his problems in the world could be tied to me not having enough sex with him. And so it became this constant mental state of how can I do it more? And just timing it on a calendar, counting the days, making sure that I had enough wine to go with it because I needed it at times, and making absolute sure that I was taking care of his needs so that he wouldn't be mad, so that he wouldn't be sad or depressed or suicidal, so that he wouldn't yell at the kids, so that he wouldn't watch pornography and sin, so my whole world was wrapped up in preventing him from having any sort of consequences of not being sexually satisfied.
That's a really interesting point of view. And what I find myself thinking is that I can remember a pastor telling me it was my job to meet the needs of my husband. And I never really thought about it as preventing him from sinning, although I certainly can see that today. I actually internalized that. And in full disclosure, I wasn't a therapist back then, but I internalized that to say that I'm the sinner if I don't meet his needs.
Absolutely. It was my sin first. My sin was causing his sin.
Yeah.
Right up until the day I asked him to leave was because the night before I had caught him with porn again, and he accused me. He blamed me, told me it was my fault and that he wouldn't have to if I had done my job as a wife. And that was it. That was it for me. That had happened so many times, and I had just had enough, and I couldn't take it anymore. So that's what I talk about a lot, is that I didn't just say no to him and deny him all that, like the Bible says, don't deprive your husband, don't deny your husband. I didn't. I did it as often as I could stand to do it. But this is what's so crazy, is that and I hear these stories from women all the time. We're faking it From the minute he walks in the door after work, the whole thing is a performance to meet that need of his that he swears is a need, that all of society says is this desperate need for men. When in reality, our need is just human connection. And if we had that, we would not have this sex problem.
Well, and I say that all the time. I'm like, man, if you are your wife's hero, you'll have enough sex to last you a lifetime.
Yeah.
If if you can be her hero, if you can be her safe space, you'll get whatever you need. Nat, could you talk a little bit about what that subtle coercion looks like? I think you explained it.
Well, and this is just it. There are a lot of women in my comments who tell stories of just this wildly overt coercion where it's like, I'm going to leave you if you don't do this. I'm not satisfied and I should have a right to go find it with someone else. Those kinds of things are really blatant and obvious. And it wasn't like that for me. It was, for me, I use the term weaponized misery because it was a lot of really just, and I'd be like, oh, honey, what is it? Well, what do you expect? I'm frustrated. It was just all these little comments all throughout the day or the week. And I knew what it meant. He didn't really need to say anything. I knew what he meant. And sometimes it was just a sigh. Sometimes it was just a slamming of a drawer, getting the silverware out at dinner time. And it was always directed at me and I knew exactly what he meant. It was punching his pillow and when I turn him down because I'm exhausted from a long day. It's just a lot of little subtle covert things that were a message to me that nobody else could understand. I wouldn't be able to explain it to anyone else. That also made me feel like I was crazy to think that there was anything going on there, that it must all be in my head. No, it's me. I just need to be having more sex with him. And despite whatever emotional connection was lacking, I kind of believed too that he would get that emotional connection and we would find that love and affection that we always had if I could just have more sex with him. And so I was setting about saving my marriage for 20 years because I thought sex was all that was missing.
Yeah, so that's also so interesting. I have these flashbacks of much more overt experiences, being called frigid.
Yes.
Being told that, oh, for crying out loud, everybody does something, because another thing that's definitely coercion is moving outside of your comfort zone sexually, right? Whether it's wearing something that you don't want to wear or having sex in a place that you don't feel comfortable having it, that, oh, give me a break, nobody's watching. Just that little pushing piece is so challenging.
Yeah. And I have a playlist in my profile if you want to look it up. There's two of them. One is what coercion looks like, and another one is things they say. So the things they say is the specific phrases that these men repeat. And I have heard these from hundreds of women, the exact phrases, like, we might as well just be roommates. We're not really married. Well, I might as well just get it from somebody else. You said you had a headache yesterday. You just said no last time. Just all kinds of things that they say that make you, it is telling you that you are wrong to say no to sex.
Yeah.
Anything other than, okay, what else do you want to do?
Right. I want to say this again.
But you're my wife. Sorry. I caught that one real quick, but you're my wife. I have a couple of videos about that one because that was the number one thing he would say to me, but you're my wife. And it was very sad and solemn, but you're my wife. I just want to love my wife. God wants us to love each other. Do you not love me?
Yeah. I didn't want a sexless marriage. I want to say this for everybody who has popped in because I think it's important. Physical intimacy is a very important part of a intimate relationship. Physical intimacy is the thing that sets you apart from roommates. But no one is entitled to physical intimacy because you're intimate partner. And I think that's a really important concept for you, for each of us, I should say this way, for each of us to discern. If I'm in a truly intimate, emotionally intimate partnership, physical intimacy is the celebration of that emotional connection. It is the capitulation of that connection. And it's an important part because no other relationship gets that.
Yeah.
Right? It is important. That's the end goal. That's the goal. But it's
not
really
to mention the sex is just so much better if you're actually connected to each other.
Absolutely. It's the celebration of that emotional connection. And that's really important for you to understand, for each of us individually to understand, so that we can put a voice to these challenges that we have.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the one thing, Nat, that you learned about yourself that you would want other women to know?
I think for me, my biggest downfall was empathy. Part of it was Christianity teaching me to put others first. And part of it was just a deep love for my husband. But this compounded in me this idea that I really shouldn't say no because I'm hurting him. And so whether it was coming from him and it was coming from other women at church, whenever I would try to broach this topic with them, that they would tell me I'm withholding. They would say that, you're abusing him by not satisfying him sexually. I mean, they don't say it in those words, but the implication is very clear. And so I learned that if I had not had quite as much empathy and had been able to have more boundaries and standing up for myself, this wouldn't have been an issue. Maybe we would have gotten divorced 19 years ago, but I wouldn't have suffered all of this for 20 years.
Yeah. Okay. Can we say that maybe just a little bit louder in the back, right? That boundaries and using your voice are critical components of the success in these connections. Robert, I wanted to answer yours. How do you get the emotional connection back? So remember how you built it in the first place. What did you do? You took time to ask questions. You shared your days with each other. You spent time together that didn't revolve around just getting laid. You probably spent quiet time just sitting and asking deep questions, right? I can't tell you how many times I hear somebody say, my husband doesn't even know me anymore. He hasn't asked me a personal question in 10 years. And obviously that's a painful scenario. But I really try to remember, what did we do to build the emotional connection? You're very different people after a couple of years of marriage. I would go back and check all of my assumptions. Set some time aside, put your phone down, get a babysitter, check into a hotel room with the promise that, listen, I'm just like, there's candles, and then maybe even make a sign, a no sex zone. I want to just talk to you. If a hotel room, if there's too much trauma in the relationship, for that, there's been a lot of arguing over sex, that's probably not a great idea. Just sit in the living room with some candles lit, or sit next to the Christmas tree this time of year. Check all of your assumptions. I remember when we met that your favorite color is brown. Is it still brown? I mean, I just want to check in with you because I'm not sure if I really know that anymore. We go to Mexican food all the time. Is that because you really love it, or is it because you think I still love it? That's a really good place to start. I would ask her or him, what do I do that lets you know that you're loved? I think that's a really good question.
Am I doing anything that's making you feel unloved or unsafe?
Yes. Is
That
there
is an
any?
important question. I just real quick, I had to do that with my kids in the same way that I would have done it with my husband if we had stayed together. But I was doing it for my kids at that time. Was, what have I done as a mother to make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe or unloved? Let's talk about that and help me be a better mom. It's not their responsibility to make me a better mom, but their input can help me. And so, same thing, husband and wife. It's not my husband's job to make me a better wife, but if I can get his input on what I'm doing that's making him not feel so much love for me outside the bedroom, then maybe we could work on that. But I have
Yeah.
to be willing to listen to it.
Yeah. So therein lies another challenge for some people, right? If your partner comes to you and says, "Hey, listen, I'm really struggling with this part of our relationship," be open to just hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
Use responses like, "Can you tell me more about that, or can you define that to me, or for me?" Be open to the critique. That's really important because nothing changes without that.
Yeah. And uh, just using my kids as an example, because we are so tight now, we're really good. And I was not the greatest mom before all of this blew up between my husband and I. But it would have gone very differently if I had said to my kids, now listen, this is what you're doing. And this is where I don't feel loved by you. So I need you to do this more. I need you to do that more. And I need more of this from you. That conversation would have tanked our relationship and I would have had nothing from them. But because I came to them and said, what can I do? They returned it to me. It took them a little while, but they did eventually say to me, Mom, can I do anything for you?
That reminds me of, I think this is a Christian movie too, but it's the story about a man who spends 30 days saying, how can I make your life better?
Fireproof.
Right? Yes, fireproof. Exactly. You know, and that's something we do, by the way, when we're building emotional intimacy. We pack a little note in a lunch. We'll stop by with a donuts and a coffee. We do all of these little things that are just because we paid attention. And so we can't forget to do that in life, the follow through, the importance. You said something that was important, Nat, that I wanted to comment on, and that is the if somebody says, so you didn't actually say it this way, but I'll say that if I come to you, or if my partner comes to me and they say, I'm really struggling, that is not the time to say, yeah, I'm struggling too. That is not the time to say that.
Yeah.
That is the time for you to just take it in, respond in a way that says, I hear you, and I hear that's important. What do you need from me? So that's kind of the follow through on what Nat is saying. What do you
And
need
I
from
think it
me?
would be enough just to say, I hear you. And this is a lot for me to process. Can I have some time to think about this?
Fair enough.
Because my head wasn't there. And you just
Mhm.
put this on me. And I'm feeling all kinds of things. And I'm feeling like I want to react to you. But I don't want to react to you. So let me just have some time. I've been through that with my oldest, who's 19, and they have great boundaries. And they will say to me, Mom, I can't handle this right now. Give me some time, give me some space. And then we come back in a few hours or the next day, and we're great.
You know, I want to go back to this idea that some people feel that they have this emotional connection, but they've gotten very lazy in their intimacy. And I think that can be almost as problematic. And I would say that if there's too much of that laziness, it interrupts the emotional connection over time.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling that you've lost the spark in the physical intimacy, you really care about your partner, you have fun together, but the spark piece is missing, it could be because you need to address that. And I work with a lot of middle-aged adults who don't know how to have that conversation with their partner. So
Yeah.
you can say, I'm kind of tired of this position. I'm kind of tired of that activity. I'm kind of tired. I mean, it's boring now.
Yeah.
Be open to talking about these things.
Yeah.
I also want to
It's
go ahead.
important to note that society sets up men to believe that sex is boosting their self-esteem, and that if a woman doesn't want to have sex with him, that there's some natural flaw in him, and she just doesn't like him. And it's all about, if I say I have a headache tonight, I'm really tired, he internalizes that and thinks that I just don't love him, and then he's upset about that. And then later, when it actually is because of him, because he's acting like a jerk because I had a headache, well, now it's just me. I'm just withholding. So I think there's this idea that men have that sex means that they're a manly man now. And that's just, we have to find other ways to connect. There's so many other forms of intimacy. I have a hashtag, by the way, real intimacy is. And I don't have a whole lot of videos on that one, but I'm trying to talk about or do examples of other forms of intimacy besides sex, but that
Good.
would turn me on pretty quickly.
Yeah, good, good. I actually had a conversation this week with a gentleman who was explaining that he grew up with very low self-esteem. And so when a woman showed interest in him, it bolstered that esteem. How he filled his esteem bucket. And so when his wife was tired or was stressed at work, or the kids were really too much and she just couldn't handle somebody else wanting to be touching, he internalized, I'm no longer attractive. All those bullies in my life were correct. And so one of the things that I suggested was that when she's not able to meet that see, you're helping me, you're teaching me here, because I don't want to say meet that need.
Yeah.
When she's not in a place where she wants sex, I think because she's a caring partner, now that she knows this, she can say, you know what, sweetie, I am not in the mood tonight, but you're still my guy. You're
Yeah.
still the most attractive guy. You can use words of affirmation to bridge that space if you know that that's your partner's wounded place, so that that's your partner's scar. But you have to kind of get to the place that you know that.
Yeah, and we have to know that about each other, because for me it exhibited so early on, like even on the wedding night. It was anger and frustration. And so
Yeah.
I didn't have the sense of self-esteem for him, even though I know now that's obviously what it was. But in that moment it was just anger and frustration, and I felt like a child who'd done something wrong and was being scolded. So that had I known it was just self-esteem, maybe I could have buttered him up a little bit and told him some nice things, but I just thought I'd done something wrong and I was in trouble.
All right, I want to get to another one of these messages. Katie Bear, if you're still here, is it normal for that emotional connection to ebb and flow? I'm going to say yes. I think
Yeah.
that in any long-term relationship, we all change, and hopefully we're all growing, but we're doing it kind of like this. There's no perfectly linear movement. He's going to be a little higher, she's going to go, and this is what it looks like. And it also does this, right? So it's kind of like you're doing this somehow. And
Yeah.
that's when you notice that you're in an ebb instead of a
Mm-hmm.
flow. Pay attention and connect emotionally somehow, right? Even if it's you know what, will you come take a walk with me? I'm sorry we haven't been connected. I've got all this going on, blah 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 blah. I hope you'll consider being patient with me. Something like that. something
Yeah.
that
Well, and
says,
sexual desire ebbs and flows too. You know, when a woman has a baby, she's focused on that baby. She's not worried about the husband who's a grown adult. But
Mhm,
so many women get pressured for sex immediately after having a baby, when
mhm,
they hormonally and mentally, they're biologically, they are primed for taking care of another human being. And so there is a time when I'm just not interested in sex, leave me alone. And if you really love someone, you've got to back off and let that be okay.
yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, not that we want to necessarily equate it with something so trivial, but the reason that people feel like it's a chore is because we treat it like a chore. I think that, oops, I guess she's going to pop back in. Um, if we, if we stop treating it like a chore, then and treat it, give it the kind of the celebratory piece that's so important, I think that that would go a long way. It's not just another thing that we need to do.
I just want to point out something really quickly because it comes up in I'm seeing it in the comments and I see it in my comments. I say this a lot, but there is a huge difference between an abusive person and a person who abuses. So there are people out there that cannot be changed, and they're going to deflect and turn it back on you. And what did I do to make you feel that way? And I wouldn't do that. And some people can be slightly defensive in the moment and then come around later. But there are some really, truly abusive people, and there really is not a lot you can do but get away from them. And so I want to kind of just put that out there, that there's a distinction there and there. But I think there are a lot of good people who just have abusive behavior because they're defensive and they just haven't learned how to regulate their emotions and deal with things in a healthy way.
I also think there are people who engage in this, specifically this kind of abusive behavior, without understanding that it's abuse. Like
Yes.
I just really believe that a lot of people have an understanding that marriage is where sex happens,
Yeah.
and they don't think deeper than that.
Yeah. And I do have men who out to me, maybe two or three, who have said that that was their mindset. But my videos have changed that for them, and they're feeling more humbled and closer to their wives now. So I know that there are good men out there who are doing and saying all these things, but don't realize how bad it is. And
Yeah,
that's why I talk about it every day.
yeah, and I see it every week. Literally every week I hear somebody saying something like that, like, well, what am I supposed to do then? And I explain solo practices, and that's
Mm-hmm.
perfectly optional, and that
Yeah.
it can bridge the space while you rebuild the emotional connection with your partner. How do you work with a spouse whose love language is physical touch?
Oh, don't get me started on love languages. I just made a video last night. I said, if your love language is physical touch, but you get upset with your partner when they don't want to be touched, your love language is not physical touch. Your love language is control.
Say that one more time.
If your love language is physical touch, but you get upset with your partner when they don't want to be touched, your love language is not physical touch. Your love language is control.
Okay, I might have to digest that a little bit. And you know, because I think it's fair for somebody to be disappointed that their partner isn't open to receiving their love. Disappointment is disappointment is a natural consequence of
Yes. And
not.
I didn't say disappointed, really. I said if you're upset with them, meaning they're in
Okay,
trouble, they've done something wrong because they don't feel like being touched right now, and you're mad at them, you're upset with them,
and so
that's a
here
problem.
so herein lies, people, gentlemen, I'll say gentlemen, but whoever it is that this applies to, if you express your disappointment in a critical, aggressive way, that's the problem, right? It's
But
and
also, remember though, my husband was very sad and depressed, and I was basically, and he did actually say to one of my kids, imply that he might be suicidal. This is a problem too. It can
Right.
be very, but if you are putting your emotions onto your partner to say you have to have sex in order to fix what's going on inside of me, that's the problem.
Okay, here's the therapist part of me coming out strongly. Because what I teach my couples is that you can have whatever feeling you want. Feelings aren't right or
Yes.
wrong. And I am not responsible for the feeling technically, and I'm going to clarify this. I'm not responsible for your feeling. Your feeling comes from inside of you. I'm not making you disappointed. Your disappointment is a result of how you feel about not getting something.
Yes.
I'm not telling you to be disappointed. I'm not forcing you to be disappointed. And so your disappointment is yours to work with. And that's the boundary, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So if you're suicidal because I don't want to be touched, that's not on me.
Yes. And well, and the way I put it is the feelings are valid, the behavior is not.
Correct.
Your feelings are important, but we have to make sure that you curb your behavior so that you're not putting those feelings onto your partner.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to have to debate the putting your feelings on piece, right? and these are some semantic differences that I think get our communication in trouble in all relationships. When we use the word we'll say make me. I think this is just a good educational moment. When we say it makes me, you make me, what we're actually saying is we're using the word make to imply generate. It generates these emotions inside of me. What most people hear is the second definition of make, and that is to force. And so when I hear that you think I'm making you, I'm going to get very defensive because I'm not forcing you. And then the communication breaks down. We can say that so differently. You say, you know what? I have all these feelings coming up when I hear that comment, when I hear those kind of comments. Mm-hmm. Communication in a relationship is easily 50% of the success of those relationships. And our semantics are very, very challenging. Now, I have, I think, a total of 7 podcasts that specifically address all the communication pieces that I teach to couples. I'm pretty sure the podcast link is in my bio. You can at least get to it from my website, because I don't remember. I haven't been on my bio for a while. It's episode 1 or season 1, episodes 12 through 19, if I'm not mistaken. It's those little tiny changes that we make will make a difference in how people interpret our meaning. And, you know, for whatever reason, anything that I feel originates with some meaning that I give to the behavior, the words, the action, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm afraid of dogs, it's not because I was born afraid of dogs. It's because somewhere along the line, a dog bit me or chased me or jumped on me. And now I'm applying my fear to all dogs. But your dog didn't do a damn thing to me. And so my fear of your dog does nothing to do with your dog. It's based on something that happened to me somewhere else in my life. And that concept works with feelings also. If I feel this way, it probably, especially if it's instant, it probably has nothing to do with you, unless over time I've developed this feeling because of things that I've applied meaning to. So, for example, that guy who felt unloved by his wife because she didn't want to be touched, he interpreted her absence of touch as not loving him instead of interpreting it as, oh my gosh, you must be so tired.
Hey, Kate. Yeah, and I've done videos about this, even down to the dog analogy. But I just want to take that for just a second and say, if you have been bit by dogs and now you're afraid of dogs, or you take this dog coming toward you to mean that he's threatening, that's not the dog's fault.
It's
and if
not.
you lash out and beat that dog, you're the one at fault. So
Absolutely.
what I see a lot, and what happened with my husband, I believe he was in his mid-30s when we met. I know for a fact that he was rejected quite a bit by women before I met him. No doubt he hung on to that pain. And every time I turned him down, it was a reenactment of that rejection for him. No matter what reason I had for turning him down, he was rejected.
Exactly.
But he lashed out at me, put that on me, and I internalized it because of my deep empathy for him. I took that on myself. And so I didn't have the frame of mind to say, this is his rejection. This is not me. This is just him. I took that to mean this absolutely is me. And I need to do something about it. I have to fix this.
Yeah.
And so it just continually just kept pounding onto me.
Yeah. And so I think I hope everybody really took in what she said, because that's exactly right. And the only thing I would say is that when somebody is putting that on, when they're directing all of that towards you, because that's really what it is, right? They're throwing all that, they're puking all of that old stuff onto the present moment. You do not have to pick it up or clean it up. You don't have to do that.
I wish I had known that.
Yeah.
And I want not just men, but the women who do this too. Women can be coercive, but I want everyone who is feeling this low self-esteem and is putting it on their partner, I want them to get themselves some sort of therapy. If they have access to actual therapy with a therapist like you, that's wonderful. If not, Google whatever you can and just figure out how to deal with your own feelings before you accidentally hurt somebody you love.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're really talking, and I hope that you can hear there's two sides of this, right? It's the behavior and it's the boundary. It's the behavior and the reaction. And when, that's important to understand, because when one of the dangers is sitting in a space of being a victim when you don't have a boundary and you take all this on, right? And I'm not even saying that people will openly acknowledge or even see themselves as a victim, except for maybe how they then engage in the world around them. But I've had lots of people say, I lost myself, I shut down, I stopped thinking about myself. It never became about me. I just gave up because I got lost. And if you have good boundaries, that doesn't have to happen. You have to have a boundary and you have to use your voice. And like Nat said, maybe that would have meant that she was only married a year instead of 20. I know in my case, I probably wouldn't have been, I probably never would have gotten married, to be honest. Now, the truth is, I don't regret a moment of that. I learned a lot. I became a therapist. I help people. I have amazing children, right? So I'm very grateful for all of that. And that prevents me from being a victim of his, 16 years of that behavior. Right?
Yeah.
Let's go back to
I feel the same way. I feel like I think now with as many. Yeah. I'm sorry. You're saying something.
No. Go ahead.
Oh, I just feel the same way a year later now. We're not quite divorced yet, but working on it. And I've been safe for a year. No one to pressure me, and a bed all to myself. And I'm thankful. it's weird to say that I'm thankful that it happened, but I'm thankful that I have this way to turn it around and talk about it. And I hope it's helping people.
You know, you're bringing up something I talked about on Monday night. And so if you're new to me, I go live on Mondays and Thursdays at 9 p.m. Except for next Monday, I probably won't be here. But one of the best things you can do for yourself when you're going through a really tough time, whether it's a trauma or whether it's just a hardship, if you can find a way to make meaning from that experience, like Nat just described, it's so much better for your long-term recovery from of that time period, because we spend much less time in the woe me victim space.
Yeah.
Meaning making takes a lot of different shapes, and we can talk about that at another time. But because you just did it, I wanted to point it out.
Yeah. Robert, I'm glad that you're in therapy and working on being a better dad for your kids. That was one thing I asked of my husband too. And in the end, he didn't believe in therapy. He didn't think that it was anybody. He's of the mind, and there are a lot of people like this, maybe, Leslyn, I don't know if you run into these people who believe that therapy is for people who have issues and who are broken. And so if he doesn't think there's anything wrong with him, then he doesn't need therapy. It's only for you because you're the one with the problem.
Well, and so I would say that, and my standard answer is, so if your car's not making a noise, you don't take it in for an oil change?
Robert, that's a good way to look at it. I think we all have issues that we need help with. I think we all could use better physical health. We all could use better mental health. And none of us are perfect. And we go to a regulation once a year for a physical, right? Don't we? Most of everything.
Exactly.
We go to the dentist for a checkup. I go to the eye doctor every 2 years just to be sure. So,
and that's what I said as you were leaving is, or as you popped off is, does that mean that if your car's not making noise, you don't take it in for an oil change?
Yeah.
You know,
regular maintenance.
Anything that you want to keep has to be maintained.
Yeah. Can we just briefly, the word libido has come up a couple of times. And
I see that.
Again, I'm not the therapist. I don't actually know about this stuff, but I have a hard time with people who separate libido and sex drive from the actual relationship, as though a person can independently within themselves have a natural drive for sexual activity independent of their partner. I disagree with that.
Well, I actually think that there is a drive when during orgasm, dopamine is released into the brain, and so the desire for a dopamine rush is one of the reasons that people have solo sex, right?
Okay, so that's, yeah. Oh, yes. So that's what you're saying. So in that case, though, is it strictly physical and I don't actually need a partner?
Yes, for the dopamine. I mean, the truth is that I think what we're discovering is that the pleasure that's experienced in the physical connection is intensified with connection and partnership. Okay. There's no doubt about it. It's a much different experience when you're emotionally connected and you feel a sense of belonging with a partner. The intensity of that experience is bigger, right? But there is a connection to physical desire, for the desire to have an orgasm, because there's a dopamine rush there, right? I don't want to get kicked off, so I want to be careful.
I get what you're saying. I talk about this stuff all the time, so I don't have a problem with it. But I will say a lot of the comments that I get from men and women seems to imply that if a woman doesn't want to have sex with her husband, it's that it can all be fixed, by some sort of hormone treatment or a medication, because all it is a simple libido problem. It has nothing to do with the relationship.
Yeah, so I think it's both. There are definitely people who hormonally have challenges with desire. And there's more of and I will say this. I think it's my understanding, and I'm not a medical doctor, so I'll just put that out there. But when I find a couple who's coming in and she says, I really want to be intimate, but my body's not responding, that's a medical problem that needs to be addressed. That's not a relationship problem, because she's saying, and it's probably not even a process problem. Like if you just hit this spot and do this massage, this part, your body will respond. There are definitely cases where bodies won't respond that are not necessarily psychologically connected. It can be a medical problem. So you rule that out.
Well, let me just ask this real quick though, because I would have said the same thing. While I was being coerced, while I was in the height of complete impotence, I would have said, I love my husband and we have a great relationship and I just want to be able to have sex more. So there must be something wrong with me physically.
So you go rule that out. That's it. Just go rule it out.
And so without the element of coercion in the conversation, without knowing that's actually what was happening, I would have, and my husband did several times accuse me, well, not accuse, but just he would bring up menopause from the time I hit 30. He thought I had menopause.
Cats, gynecologists will know, right? And sometimes you have to specialize like in sexual problems. Make sure you see a gyno that's not just mostly an OB, but maybe a gynecologist that focuses on the women's sexual response. It is something to rule out because it does exist. However, I would bet that probably a better than half percentage of the people who would go to the doctor to say, is there something wrong with me? I would bet that it's more psychological, in which case it's a connection problem. One of the questions I always ask is, how do you make out when you're by yourself? If you're by yourself and everything's working, it's not a medical problem. Okay.
Just for frame of reference, when I was by myself for about 10 years, I still could not orgasm.
So then, okay. So that's what I'm saying. If you could, I would say everything's working and it's definitely psychological.
Yeah.
Now, if you're saying that you couldn't, now we're saying, okay, we still have the possibility of there being a physical thing. It's a possibility. But we also have, then as a therapist, I would say, all right, I would start investigating what's your religious beliefs, what kind of sexual attitude did you grow up with as a kid? What is your relationship like? I mean, I would really, because then we kind of investigate if it's not working when you're by yourself, then we have to, and you've been checked and it's not a medical problem, then we know that something else is going on. Psychologically, you know, your heart could be closed. And when I say your heart, if you think, and I go back to the religious aspect, if you think you're sinning, nothing's going to work. You know, and yeah, if you think somebody's watching you, you know, like somebody said to me one day, my mother passed away. What if she can see me? Okay. So let's work on this, right? So is asexuality abnormal?
No, asexuality is valid.
It's valid, totally valid. And that's why I'm saying that there are some other reasons. There are other things.
It is very complex.
Yes.
And I think what my goal is just to make coercion a possibility for people and something that we can talk about and not necessarily accuse everybody of it, but just to say that if there is any chance this is what's happening, we need to know about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what I'm hearing from women who have gotten out of these situations, there are a number of women who routinely tell me that the minute they were with a man who was safe, everything lit on fire and they came back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Women who believed they were asexual because they
Yeah.
just couldn't for years
Yeah.
have suddenly woken up because they're with someone who's safe.
Right. So asexuality is a absence of interest in participating in solo or mutual sex, right? It's, is it a choice? Somebody asked, is it a choice? I
Can I
don't
just
know.
say I have a kid who is asexual?
Okay.
And it absolutely is just something they're born with. They just have no natural desire for anything like that. Even if we're just watching TV and there's something remotely toward kissing that comes on, they just don't want anything to do with it. Can we flip it? No desire at all.
I am not an expert in that arena, so it's probably not in my best interest to try to answer that question.
I also do have a lot of men who accuse women of this. They'll say, well, maybe she's just asexual and she didn't tell him. She's been lying to him for years.
Yeah. So my instinct, I'm just going to share my instinct. My instinct is that a normally functioning brain is designed to have interest, because at the very base of our biology is the need to procreate. It's to the basic tenet of animal psychology is to spread genes.
On the other hand, you have people that are born without uteruses.
So that's an abnormal body, though, right?
Is
It's I'm using the term normal to be the
common.
Thank you. I'll say common. I'll use that word because that
I wouldn't say it's abnormal. Maybe it's uncommon.
Very, very fair. That's fair. So the common function, the commonly understood function of the brain or of the physical body at the basic level of cellular structure is to extend itself, to make another body just like you. That's the basic tenet of animal psychology. Mm-hmm. So our brains, therefore, the postulation is that the brain is designed organically to have this natural inclination, which is why we see these hormones when they get turned on. We often see the common response to that hormonal turn on is the coming together of people. Not everybody does that because humans are evolving too, right? And I would say that the general consensus in the science community, based on my understanding, is that the brain is far behind in evolution the culture. And I think that's an interesting idea, that biologically we're not evolving as fast as our culture is changing. Okay. And so that creates some conflict behind what we're driven to do and the kind of ways that we're existing in the world.
Yeah. Well, but we also have gay and lesbian people who are they're not existing to procreate, and they're not having sexual activity to procreate. And so I believe that sexual activity is for personal enjoyment as well as procreation. But I also believe that it's completely valid to not find any personal enjoyment in it at all.
I also agree with that. I'm just saying that it's that there's the biology and then there's the emotion, and we don't know where they're connected.
Yeah. Well, there is a demisexual, I've learned this recently, that is a person who really, truly cannot feel anything sexual unless they are emotionally connected to someone.
Yeah. Yeah. We're learning a lot for sure. And even since I was in grad school and had some basic classes, there have been a lot of new things, awareness that and you guys, there are research projects that people are doing that we have no understanding of. So I think if the key is to be the key is to make sure that we stay open and learn and be willing to grow, right?
Yes. And that is important. And every individual person is valid in whatever their feelings or beliefs. And between a couple, they should be open to learning about each other and loving each other however they present. The whole point of my channel, my page, is to say that whatever reason your partner doesn't want to do it tonight, be okay with that. Move on.
Yeah. And I think that's the essence of this conversation and the point behind wanting to bring this really to the table is making sure that there's space in your relationship for the conversation and the boundary and the voice of both partners without judgment or defense. I think that's a really important point to take home. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you. Thank you.
Good
Nat.
night.
Really appreciate your energy.
Oh, good. We'll see you again.
All right. Take care, guys.